All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
All righty. Well, first off, Megan, thank you so much for inviting me to come speak with y'all today about pocket prairies. Like Megan said, I'm a wildlife program specialist with AgriLife Extension Service. My area focus is small acreage, but also mammals, as well as birds. That was the other one that I was forgetting. But yeah, my area that I cover is the Texas Hill Country mainly, and then deep into deep South Texas. So with that, we'll get started with
Hear anything.
pocket prairies. So first off, what is a pollinator? This is something that we learned in, I'm sure, elementary school, if not before then. But basically, a pollinator is an insect or any other animal that can convey pollen to a plant and thereby allows the fertilization of plants, which we all know is very important. So, really across the world, we have basically your three main classes of pollinators. So you have insects, birds, and mammals. Obviously, under insects, the one that we really think about is things like butterflies, but you also have bees in there as well. And if y'all are reading the list, you may see flies in there, even mosquitoes. Yes, they are actually pollinators, which is very surprising. And in some areas of the world, flies are actually the second best pollinator next to bees. Which is very, very surprising. You also have moths included under insects as well. For birds here in North America, we have, hummingbirds mainly, but orioles are also a great pollinator that we have here. Underneath birds and mammals, I have some of them in little asterisks. Those are species that we do have here in Texas, but their range is very much limited. So they may not have quite as wide of a distribution, especially under the mammals. So bats are also another great pollinator. So the Mexican long-tongued bat and the long-nosed bat are the two bats that we have here in North America that are pollinators. These guys have a very, very restricted range here in Texas, mainly, far west Texas, as well as, around McAllen, deep South Texas. If y'all are fans of tequila, these are the guys that you can thank for that. They pollinate the agave that people use to make tequila. So pollinators are extremely important. This is something we all know. And pollinators provide an estimated $235 billion in ecological service. That's billion with a B. So that is a lot of money that pollinators save us on a yearly basis. And a little fun statistic is that 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we take actually exists because of pollinators. So without that, we would really have no fruits, no vegetables. We would have no cotton would be available to us. Really and truly, just about everything that we use is somehow connected to pollinators. So pollinators, just like many other things we have, many other wildlife species in the world today, they are facing quite a few challenges, unfortunately. And pollinators as a whole, 20% of our native bumblebees here in the US have undergone significant declines in the past 50 years. The Western migrating population of monarch butterflies has a 99% chance of extinction by 2080. Rufous hummingbirds have declined by 65% since the 1970s. And 80% of pollinating bat species have declined across the world. So this is just a trend. And sadly, again, like I said, this is not a new trend for wildlife. And pollinators are one of those where they are on the smaller side. Bats, butterflies, bees, hummingbirds, they are all very small. So a lot of people, while they're very important, they're kind of one of those species that slips under the radar just a little bit. So the main threats to our pollinators are going to be habitat loss, disease, and climate change. So habitat loss, again, one of those things that is, if y'all are very familiar with wildlife, is not anything that is new. We as a human species, our population is growing every single day. And as our population grows, we need more space to have houses, to have our grocery stores. So we're losing out on a lot of that habitat for our wildlife. Diseases are something that are naturally occurring in the environment. But it becomes a challenge when some of those are introduced. And lastly is climate change. So climate change, again, had to throw this pun in there. Whether or not you believe in climate change, it is something that we are noticing is affecting our wildlife. So I'm going to dive into a little bit of each of these for our pollinators. So with habitat loss. So some of the common reasons for habitat loss, I touched on a little bit, human development being a big one. Agriculture is another one. It's one of those necessary evils. We need agriculture in order to produce our food so we can eat. Invasive plants, those non-native plants that are taking up space for our native plants that our pollinators rely upon. That decreased plant diversity. So again, those agricultural fields, while yes, we need them, they're planting them in, it's an entire field of corn or cucumbers or spinach. There's no diversity. And in wildlife, we need diversity. We don't like monocultures. Those impervious surfaces, so the sidewalks, the roads that we drive on, taking up real estate that could have plants for our pollinators. Those urban monocultures, which are very similar to those agricultural fields and monocultures, is people have these beautiful Bermuda grass and St. Augustine yards. They're perfectly manicured. They look really nice to some people, but they really don't provide much for our pollinators. And again, those non-native plants, they are really, the reason that they are here, the reason that they have persisted and are becoming a problem is because they are out competing our native plant species. They are better adapted to our environment, oddly enough, than some of our native plants. They are faster growing. They respond to disturbance much better than some of our native species. And, a lot of those native species, again, they are a food source. They are a host plant for a lot of our pollinators. So pesticides. So this more so is in regards to our insect pollinators. But so when I say a pesticide, this is a very, very broad term. Pesticides are going to include insecticides, herbicides, fungicides. So basically, it is a substance or mixture that is supposed to destroy, repel, or mitigate any sort of pest. So throughout this presentation, I will say pesticide just as sort of a very broad term rather than saying, insecticide or herbicide. Biggest thing with these is, improper use of them is a major issue. Obviously, agricultural practices use a lot of pesticides, a lot of herbicides to help control those pests that they have. Because again, if they can't have a high yield in regards to the crop that they are growing, they're not going to make money. They'll go out of business. And we also won't have as much food available. So it's one of those things where we are trying to figure out how to balance that pesticide utilization while also keeping our pollinators as healthy as possible. So a lot of agricultural practices utilize this integrated pest management, which just helps to reduce the impact. So basically the overall goal of the short version of it is IPM is the abbreviation. So IPMs are basically trying to utilize other means of keeping pests out of an agricultural field rather than strictly relying on pesticides to get that job done. So migration hazards. So this is going to be one that is a little bit heavier towards things like hummingbirds. Obviously, we realize that a lot of butterflies migrate, especially monarchs are sort of the big one that everyone thinks about. But we really focus on the birds for this one. So for birds, infrastructure is a big thing. Window strikes are a big issue during migration, as well as light confusion. So if y'all are familiar with the Lights Out program, So that is just trying to get Texas to cut out any sort of unnecessary lights during migration season to keep birds from getting confused. Because if the birds get confused, they can hit things like windows. It also causes them to just utilize unnecessary energy, which is extremely vital during migration, and just use up those resources that they need to get from point A to point B. Obviously, cats are a big one. Cats kill an estimated 2.4 billion birds a year. So this is my PSA. Please keep Fluffy inside to help to save our birds. As well as during migration, we're seeing a lot of shifts towards a lot of more severe weather patterns, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But again, those severe weather patterns are very much going to make migration a lot harder. Those birds are going to have to utilize a lot more energy during that, as well as it's going to delay their migration, and also can cause a lot of mortality events during those events. Okay, so disease. So like I said, disease and parasites, they are something that occur naturally. Obviously, they can cause problems, but if they're naturally occurring here, they can cause problems. But one of the big problems is if they are foreign to us. Those foreign diseases, those foreign parasites, our native wildlife have not evolved resistances or means of combating a lot of these diseases and parasites. So those diseases are going to have a larger impact on species versus if it was more of a native or naturally occurring disease or parasite. As well as mainly on the parasite side of things, there are limited natural barriers. In its natural setting, there may be other biological factors at play, bacteria or other parasites or other things that may sort of keep that parasite in check. But when they are outside of their natural range, they really have nothing to keep them sort of in the balance of things. A lot of sources of disease are, new introductions, whether it be generally we don't introduce diseases or parasites on purpose. This is coming from things like stowaways. So you get a batch of fruit in from out of country. And, obviously here in the US, we have our checks and balances to try to keep those things out of the US, but sometimes things fail or people bring them in illegally. And you get an introduction of a new parasite or a new fungus that is detrimental to our pollinators. Okay, so last one is climate change. So biggest thing with this one is we are seeing increased temperatures. We're seeing more severe weather events. And this is causing a lot of shifts and changes in distribution of our pollinators. So they kind of go one of two ways. They either have a latitudinal shift, which is basically they are shifting further northward to slightly cooler climates, or they are having an elevational shift, meaning rather than being at the base of a mountain, they are going higher in elevation to seek cooler climates, as well as chase some of their food sources. And along with all of this is we are also seeing changes in rainfall events. So a lot of, down here where I'm at in Uvalde, we were in a pretty bad drought. And then we had those rainstorms sort of at the end of June, beginning of July. We've had, that relief of, had a little bit of relief from that drought. But this is something that we're seeing sort of all across the US, which is, plants, they need water in order to survive. So those weather events that I just talked about. So probably one of the biggest things is because we are seeing warmer temperatures, a lot of our plants are flowering sooner than they used to. And it is causing an issue when our pollinators are migrating. So what happens is plants go based off of, temperatures and some other cues to say, hey, it's time to bloom. A lot of our birds, as well as things like butterflies, they go based off of basically how long the day is. So it's two different cues that a lot of our wildlife are going off of. So you have those plants that are flowering sooner because the temperature and whatnot is saying, hey, it's time to bloom. But you have our wildlife that their biology is saying, hey, it's not quite time to migrate yet. So you're having this mismatch in flowering versus migration. We have, those above average summer temperatures, which I kind of just talked about. We're having heavier rainfall events, which is making it hard for pollinators to go out and forage. Those blooms are wilting earlier because, yes, we do get heavy rains, but it's drying out faster. And there's not as much food available for those pollinators. And then, I touched on those storm events. They're more frequent, they're more severe, which again causes a lot of issues. So, now that we've talked about all the doom and gloom, let's talk about something a little bit more chipper and how we can help our pollinators out. And the thing, obviously, our topic today is pocket prairies. And so let's look at what an actual prairie is on an ecosystem scale. So basically, a prairie is an open area with a large diversity of both grasses and flowers. And this ecosystem supports a wide variety of wildlife, not just your plants. It provides habitats for, pronghorn. A lot of songbirds are found in prairie type ecosystems. So the characteristics of a prairie are basically rolling grasslands with some trees dotting the landscape. And that's something that a lot of people, if you think prairie, you don't necessarily think trees, but there are trees on the landscape. So things like pecan trees, some oak species would have resided here in Texas in our blackland prairies. So I touched on that they have a high plant diversity. Basically, a prairie roughly would have about 100 different plant species per roughly every 5 acres. So some of those species would have been the big four grasses, which would have been, big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass, Texas bluebonnet, upright prairie coneflower. Y'all can probably think of more wine cups would be another one. And the big thing with prairies is they are extremely nutrient rich in regards to the soil, mainly due to the fact of how that ecosystem works. Basically, you have a lot of plant diversity, a lot of grasses. Those plants are just going through a natural cycle of some of the roots are dying. Those roots then break down in the soil. Once they break down, those roots release a little bit of nutrients into the soil. And again, just creates that really nutrient rich soil, which thereby leads to higher plant diversity. And one of the reasons that as a country we are extremely successful in regards to our agricultural practices is a lot of our grasslands have been converted over to our croplands. So historically, the US would have been about 20 million acres of it would have been within a prairie type ecosystem. But now only 1% of those original prairies exist. Here in Texas, 3/4 of Texas would have been defined as a prairie type ecosystem. Obviously, things have changed quite a bit since then. So what is a pocket prairie? So we define a pocket prairie as basically a small scale prairie or anything that is about 1 acre or less. So pretty well anything that you can fit into your backyard would be a pocket prairie. So with a pocket prairie, what you're going to provide and the components of a good pocket prairie are going to be the components that make up any habitat. So you're going to have food, water, shelter, and space. So that food, water, and shelter, obviously you can manipulate a little bit within your property. That space component, though, is going to be however big your backyard is and however large you want to make that pocket prairie. So I'm going to now walk through each of these components and we're going to talk about the different things that you can do for pollinators. So obviously the big thing, the big food source for pollinators is going to be nectar. And native plants are going to be your best route to promote pollinators in your backyard. They have co-evolved with our native plants over hundreds, if not thousands of years. So the structure of the flower they've evolved with, they know the smell, they know the colors that attract them. So native plants are generally going to be best practice. Um, Definitely avoid um, plants with a doubled flower. And what I mean by this is, so this is an example of zinnias. So zinnias come in like bukus of different varieties. And you can see some of these flowers look really, really full. Some of them look a little less full. So those double flowers are going to be the ones that look really, really full. So think of like something like a peony would be a double flowered flower. And you just want those single flower varieties. Um, so when you go to select native plants, and I will talk about this a little bit further, is try to avoid, a lot of times when you go to nurseries, it will say that it is a native plant. But the problem is it's not a true native plant. It's a native hybrid. So sometimes you'll see the word a nativar or a cultivar or a variant. And that can kind of give you an indicator that it is not a true native. And the problems with some of those nativars or cultivars is that they are missing a component to them. So yes, they may look pretty to us, but to a pollinator, they are probably going to potentially be missing the pollen, which obviously isn't necessarily a problem because it means that that plant is not going to be able to reproduce. But one of the big ones is it may not have any nectar in it. So it may look pretty, it may draw pollinators in, but there's no nectar there for them to eat. As well as there may not be a fragrance available. So pollinators, a lot of them have their sense of smell works different than ours. So they can smell things that we necessarily can't. And that fragrance is just slightly different that they can't actually smell it. So while it may have nectar, they can't smell it. Thereby, they're not attracted to it. They're not necessarily going to feed upon it. And a lot of one thing I will say is we haven't necessarily studied what those nativars and cultivars, what they do or don't provide. So we say this because they don't necessarily always provide nectar, but we're not exactly sure, even in regards to the nutrients. So they may provide nectar, but we don't know if that nectar is slightly different from our native plants. So whenever you go to pick out plants, try to identify those cultivars, obviously, before you purchase them. And the way to go about this is one, research the native characteristics. So if you are wanting to plant lantana, lantana is a big one. So research what a native version of the lantana looks like, the characteristics of it. So when you go, you can avoid things like this. You look at the tagging and you're like, oh, there's this really pretty purple, they call this the confetti variety, but it's not actually a native version. On the flip side, you have this Bloomify mango all the way here on the left. Another, I'll say, quick little side note is a lot of the times those cultivars will have fun little names like confetti bandana lemon zest. But going back, so if that Bloomify mango color, so it looks really, really similar to the native version, but it's not. Um, this is, and my other PSA is that lantana. A lot of lantanas, when you go to the store, they're actually selling a non-native version of lantanas. So this is, if you look at the scientific name, this is Lantana camara. Lantana camara is actually native to Central and South America, not here to North America. And this is one that we have issues with and is actually pretty invasive here in Texas now, because people did not realize that this was not native. So looking at the scientific name is also another way that it can help you to know whether or not the plant you are about to purchase is a true native versus a cultivar. Okay, so while nectar does provide a very large portion of nutrition for our pollinators, they do also require other things. we have to take our vitamins. Pollinators need to take their vitamins too. So providing salt is a great one for pollinators. So you can either go about, you can purchase a salt lick. So this would be something that it's a similar salt lick to things that livestock have, mineral blocks for things like deer. You can go out and purchase them and just provide that, provide a little bit of moisture on it. You can also have damp, a little spot where you have some damp soil, or sometimes people will add sand, and then just sprinkle a little bit of sea salt on that and provide, put a little bit of water on it to get that salt to dissolve into the soil is another great option. Um, so for butterflies, obviously the adult form butterflies, they consume nectar, but caterpillars, they need an actual host plant, or they actually need vegetation to consume. Now, each butterfly species obviously has its own specific host plant. However, luckily, most caterpillars do not have one specific host plant. It's more of like a family. So like snout butterflies, if y'all are here in the like Uvalde area, we have our snout butterfly migration coming through. It's kind of the tail end, but those guys rely on hackberry species. American lady caterpillars rely on just Asteraceae, or just sunflower species in general. There are some species that are very, very specific and need one particular host plant, but luckily you can provide a wide variety of plants and satiate a wide variety of different butterfly species. Um, Biggest thing with host plants, if you provide them, is realize that they are going to look really, really bad because the caterpillars are consuming them. So they're gonna look like a bit of a hot mess express if you have caterpillars all over them. So just realize that. There are some non-native substitutes for some of our host plants. So for instance, things like dill for eastern black swallowtails is great. So if you have an herb garden, you'll probably get some eastern black swallowtails on your dill. If you have fennel and parsley, you'll get things like black swallowtails on them. So there's a lot of herbs out there that are really good host plant substitutes. And generally, if you've kind of noticed, is that a lot of butterflies kind of go for a host plant within a particular family. So like I said, the American lady is the Asteraceae family, or sunflowers. And then, Eastern black swallowtail is things that are in the dill family. Another way to provide nutrients is putting overripe fruit outside. So things like bananas, watermelon, oranges, another great way to provide nutrition. And then also just having native plants, you're going to promote native insects. So this one is more for your hummingbirds. So a lot of people think, oh, nectar, they automatically think, butterflies or even hummingbirds. But fun fact, hummingbirds actually consume about 20% of their diet in adults is actually insects. For the young hummingbirds, insects are almost like exclusively what they eat. So providing those native plants are going to provide those native insects for hummingbirds to consume besides nectar. Okay, moving on to water. So obviously these guys they're not swimmers by any stretch of the imagination. So you need to provide water, or if you are going to provide water, you need to make sure it is shallow standing water, especially for your insects. Hummingbirds can benefit from like a bubbling or a misting water feature. Well, like I said, those insects, they are going to need shallow standing water. So this can be something as keeping a mud puddle in your backyard. Obviously, if you have kids like myself, mud puddle may not be the best option. Or if you have grandkids running around, your mud puddle will probably get a little bit bigger. If you don't mind doing some laundry a little bit more frequently, it can be a nice, fun option. If you want something a little bit more on the manicured side of things, you can simply get a shallow dish, fill it with rocks or marbles or glass beads, and then just putting a little bit of water in there is another great option. If you have a sort of like a water trough type option, or even just a little pond of some kind, add some floating plants to it. You can get things like bees that'll come in and perch on that, and then they can drink up that water. Now, obviously, if you have a water feature, it's going to be a lot of standing water. So you need to make sure that you are controlling the mosquitoes. As much as, yes, mosquitoes will be pollinators. This is more so the males that pollinate. You obviously don't want to keep them around because of the fact that they cause a lot of issues with things like West Nile is a big one here. So if you do have standing water, make sure you're replacing that water on a weekly basis to get rid of any mosquito larvae that land in that water. Mosquito dunks are a good option. So mosquito dunks are completely safe for our pollinators because of the fact that the mosquito dunks are actually utilizing if I remember correctly, a bacteria, and I can't remember the name of it. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. um, a bacteria that actually goes after the mosquito larva. So you can simply place a mosquito dunk in your water, especially if you're doing like a water trough. Mosquito fish, if you have a water trough or a water feature, is another great option. And those mosquito dunks are completely safe for those mosquito fish. However, if you're obviously keeping mosquito fish, realize there's going to be a little bit more care involved with that. Making sure that they have enough food during the times of year whenever the mosquitoes are not quite as prevalent, providing aeration, providing cover for those guys, but that is an option. Okay, shelter. So a lot of times shelter for pollinators looks like a giant mess for humans. So things like leaves, dead limbs, rock piles, those look like home sweet home to these guys. If you want something that is a little bit more manicured, more so for a lot of our native bees, is going to be things like bee condos. So just about all of our native bees actually um, build their nests and reside within the soil. So having a little bit of bare soil is also another great option. They recommend that the bare patches be more of a southward facing direction to get the most amount of sun. Make sure it's fairly on the dry side. So if you have sprinklers in your yard, obviously they don't like to get wet. So trying to keep that bare patch as dry as possible. Obviously they're going to get rain, but if you do have sprinklers, just make sure that little bare patch of soil is not getting flooded by your sprinkler or directly getting hit by your sprinkler. For things like hummingbirds, providing a variety of different shrubs and trees. Obviously, they're going to use these trees for nesting, they're going to use it for perching, as well as to escape things like predators. So if you are providing those native flowers, make sure that you have some sort of tree or shrub close by they can dart to if they have any predators in the area. Okay, so that space component that I talked about, obviously that is going to be however large your backyard is. Biggest thing about the space is it's going to be that configuration of where you have that food, where you have that water, where you have that shelter within your space that's going to really benefit those pollinators. So making sure that the water is close to the food, that the food is close to the shelter is close to the water, vice versa. They are no different. Wildlife in general is no different than us. We don't like to go very far to the grocery store, and we don't really even want to go to the grocery store if we don't have to. So wildlife are going to try to utilize the least amount of energy they possibly can. Okay, so let's talk about building your pocket prairie and what that can look like. So obviously the first thing with just about anything is a little bit of preparation, a little bit of planning, because that's going to save you some headaches in the long run. You know, first off is choosing your site and assessing that site, making sure that you are choosing a site that gets pretty well full sun, but at bare minimum gets partial sun every day, because a lot of these prairie plants, if you think about it, they reside within an area that historically would have pretty well no shade. There may be a tree and they get a couple of hours of shade, but they need bright sun for those flowers. Determine how large you want your pocket prairie to be. Um, Obviously, you can always make it larger. It's hard to downsize once you've made it a certain size. So be realistic with yourself. What can you really and truly do size wise? Because you do not want to overcommit yourself. Um, Decide whether or not you're going to go the seed route or are you going to go live plants and go to a nursery and purchase them. Biggest thing with preparation is make sure that you are prepping everything, prepping basically either a year in advance or at the very latest, potentially the fall, depending upon when you're going to plant your plants. And depending upon your time or what your plan of attack is. So if you are doing things like you're just going to use live plants and you're planting in the spring, you can probably get away with a fall preparation. If you are wanting to do seeds, you are going to probably need to be prepping potentially in the summer or potentially even a year in advance to get that area ready for seeds. Um, Obviously, you're probably going to have to remove a lot of vegetation, especially if you have things like Bermuda grass or St. Augustine, a lot of turf grasses. Those guys are going to fight you to the death to disappear from your yard. That's why they make such good turf grasses. Um, so you need to remove the vegetation from the area. So you can do this a multitude of different ways. You can till. Soil solarization is another good option. So with solar solarization, what you do is basically you mow that vegetation as low as you can get it. You put thick plastic sheeting over it, and then you just let the sun do its thing. So this is a technique that you is recommended to do in the summer. And here in Texas, I can guarantee you do it for 1 year, it's probably going to toast everything underneath there. But basically, you're just baking those plants is what you're doing. Hand pulling is obviously an option. Again, if you have turf grass, is probably not the best plan of action. But if you just have a couple of weeds or a couple of bushes that need to come out, hand pulling or using hand tools or even a chainsaw, great option. Herbicide application is obviously something that is an option out there. And you can go either the chemical route, so stuff that you purchase at the store. You can go more of an organic herbicide. There are multiple different recipes out there. There's some that use it's like orange oil, vinegar, and dish soap, I believe. Lots of different recipes out there. I did forget to look at those before I hopped on here. But yeah, you just have to decide if you want to go chemical or organic. But those herbicides are really, really going to help you out. So once you've prepared, now it's time to choose your plants. What are you going to put out there? First and biggest thing is know the plants of your region. Figuring out what plants are natively and naturally supposed to be there. So you can find all sorts of different plant lists out there on the internet nowadays. Native Plant Society of Texas is a great resource. Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, another great resource. There's some, I know Austin Tex Dot, I think, has a list of plants out there. TPWD has lists of plants. I think Audubon Society for Birds has lists. There are bukus and bukus of lists out there. And if you have questions on what to plant, what to plant in your area, I can guarantee you probably have a county extension agent. Depending upon your county, you might have a horticulture agent. They can probably help you to figure out what plants. Master gardeners are another great resource to speak with. But when you're also choosing your plants, you may also want to think about, well, what pollinators do I want to attract? If you want to attract all pollinators, this may not apply to you. But if you are more interested in things like bees or butterflies, more of your insects, this is just a helpful little guide of generally what colors are going to attract your different pollinators. So for bees, it's going to be things like yellow and blue and purple, as well as they can see ultraviolet light, which obviously we can't see. So there's probably some other flowers that are thrown in there that They really like butterflies, reds, pinks, oranges, yellows, blues. They do prefer more flat top flowers. So think of something more of like a petunia or like a daisy type flower, because they like to perch on that. Well, actually, they need to perch on that flower in order to feed on it. For things like moths, obviously night blooming flowers are beneficial since they are more crepuscular or nocturnal. So like whites or cream colors or very, very light pinks are what they're attracted to. Generally, people probably don't want to attract flies, but hey, to each their own. For flies, it'll be things again like those whites, those cream colors, yellow, green. I don't know if we have any here in Texas. Flowers that smell like rotting flesh obviously are just their cup of tea. Uh, for things like hummingbirds, your reds, oranges, purples, tubular shaped flowers or trumpet shaped flowers. So like a trumpet creeper or a firecracker bush or Turk's cap are really good ones for hummingbirds. Um, Depending where y'all are here in the state, for bats, it'd be those white or light colored flowers, obviously, again, that are night blooming and are very, very large in size, since bats are the largest pollinators that we have, as well as that they have a fruity odor to them. When you are selecting plants, one of the things that they recommend is if this is your first go around, use this 9 natives rule. So basically, you are going to choose 9 natives because we have bukus of different options out there, and it can be great, but it can also be very overwhelming. So choosing just 9 plants that have bloom cycles, that have long bloom cycles, that are aesthetically complementary to you, and have a wide variety of different benefits to the pollinators you're trying to attract. In your garden, please don't forget your grasses. While yes, they don't necessarily have flowers, they are going to provide a lot of roost sites. A lot of our native pollinators also like to build their homes. So a lot of our bees like to build their homes right at the base of those plants. They're a food source for insects, which thereby feeds hummingbirds. And grasses within your pocket prairie, it's recommended that you do about like 30 to 50% of the plants are actually grasses versus in an actual prairie, it would have been more of like 60 to 70%. So cut down substantially so we can have a little bit more in the way of pretty flowers in our gardens. Okay, so next is layout. And this is something that you can get really creative with it, and you could use a computer program to design your layout. You can sketch it by hand. It does not have to be a work of art. But sketching it out can help you to figure out what is or isn't going to work. It's recommended that you group plants, same plants together. Again, it's just going to keep your pollinators from having to travel all the way across your yard. For you, it's not that far. For your pollinators. A couple of feet, a couple 100 feet, that's a pretty long jaunt for them. Leaving bare soil, again, for those native bee species. Select plants that bloom at different times of year. So basically, this is just going to create a pollinator buffet all year round versus having all your plants bloom at one time and then that's sort of it. When you do go to figure out your layout, if you're going the live plant route, make sure you are using appropriate spacing. Generally, 2 to 3 feet is the recommended space. But obviously, if you go for some of your larger pollinator plants or flowering plants, excuse me, you may need just a little bit more space to give them as they grow over time. So when you first plant some of your plants, your pocket prairie may look a little bit barren, a little bit sad, but eventually that will fill out and it will look absolutely beautiful. So if you decide to go the route of buying live plants from a nursery, just some things to keep in mind is, so where can you find native plants at? So there are some local nurseries out there that do sell or specialize in native plants. I know there are several up in the hill country. There's some in the Kerrville area. There's some in San Antonio, I believe. Fortunately, native nurseries are becoming a lot more common out there. But again, if you go to your nursery, just check those plants, ask questions. of the sales associates, and just do a little bit of research before you go and purchase those plants to make sure they're not cultivars. Your native plant societies are another great resource. They normally, at least once a year, they have native plant sales out there, and you can guarantee those are all going to be 100% true natives. If you decide to go the seed route, there are, again, lots of different seed companies out there. Just doing your research, making sure that they are a true, or excuse me, that those seeds that they are selling you, they are very, very picky about those seeds, and they make sure that no invasive species are in those seed mixtures. So you're not introducing some of those undesired species into your pocket prairie. Again, we talked about avoid purchasing those cultivars. They're not the greatest for our pollinators. If you are purchasing from a nursery, try to purchase bee safe plants. What this simply means is that those plants have not been sprayed with a pesticide before you got there. A lot of plants, or some plants, will actually have a wording on it. It says, excuse me, look for things that might say like neonicotinoid free. So neonicotinoids are a component in a lot of pesticides, and neonicotinoids are actually cause a lot of neurological issues and will eventually lead to the death of a pollinator. So look for neonicotinoid free plants. But again, speaking with the sales associate to make sure that the plants you're purchasing don't have pesticides or even residues of pesticides. Now, when you go to buy your plants, I know I am guilty of this. So when you go to buy your plants, don't look at the flowers. Yes, the flowers look pretty, and you're like, oh, this one has lots of pretty flowers on it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Look at how healthy the whole plant is rather than how many flowers it has. Look at, does it have a really developed root system? Pick a plant that doesn't have any signs of insect or disease damage on it, because really at the end of the day, you're going to get prettier flowers with a healthier plant than you are with an unhealthy plant. So it may have really pretty flowers now, but maybe it has an underlying disease or has a root development issue that may lead to the plant's potential demise further down the road. Okay, so now it's time to get a little bit dirty. So you've planned, you've bought your plants. Now it's time to put those guys in the soil and really start your pocket prairie. So when it comes to planting, you can go for one of two different planting seasons, which is what is recommended. So either the spring or the fall. There are benefits to both. There are downsides to both. So spring, you're going to get to see those blooms pretty well right away. The downside to that is you are probably going to do a little bit more weeding, a little bit more watering, because you're going to be trying to establish that plant right before the heat of the summer. The fall, it's going to be, first off, cooler temperatures for you, reduced weeding competition, but you're obviously not going to get the benefits or reap the benefits of those flowers as you would if you planted in the spring. So again, that is strictly a preference thing. Now, when you go to plant your plants, make sure you are planting them at the correct depth, that they're not too shallow, that they're not too deep. Both going too shallow or too deep is going to potentially cause issues or set your plant back. Try to plant on an overcast day. One, it's going to be a heck of a lot cooler for you. And two, it just helps to reduce that shock factor of that plant going from a pot into the soil. If your plant is a little bit root bound, meaning there's a lot of roots and they're in a really, really tight little ball at the bottom of the pot, try to break up those roots a little bit before you stick it into the ground. And then also consider potentially removing a little bit of that above ground vegetation, meaning just trim back the leaves a little bit. Just going to help to promote that root growth a little bit. Lastly, please don't panic. If you plant your plants or your seeds and your plants don't like all of a sudden shoot up with blooms, or your seeds don't automatically germinate, and you go through summer and you're like, my plants or my seeds did absolutely nothing, that's okay. It can take 1, if not 2 years for your plants to really sort of get their feet under them and really start to produce those flowers for your pollinators. A lot of times those seeds they may resprout, they may sprout that first year, and it may be kind of sad looking. But that second year, I can guarantee it's going to get better. And by the third year, you're going to be like, what in the world was I worried about? So just give your plants a little bit of time. Don't panic, especially with those live plants. As long as your plant is green, there is a plant that is living there, it is healthy, and you're good to go. Just keep watering it, keep taking care of it. Okay, the maintenance of your your pocket prairie. So biggest thing is weed as needed. And this can be, obviously, hand weeding is going to be the best route, the best means. When it comes to watering, so that first year, you're going to need to water a lot because your plants are trying to establish themselves. But once those plants are established, you're really only going to need to water if the plants start to wilt, if they start to look a little bit sad, or a little bit dried up, because that's the other benefit of native species is they are acclimatized to our hot summers, our lack of rainfall during the summer. So you just need to provide them just a little drink every now and again. It's going to save you on your water bill. And it's just, again, going to just benefit all your pollinators. Okay, so mulch. So a lot of people wonder, well, do I need to mulch? Mulching is recommended that first couple of years, just again, because you are trying to conserve that water in your soil, trying to help those plants to establish themselves. But once they're established, let that mulch just simply decompose on its own, and then just let your soil be bare. Um, Obviously, if you want to continue to mulch, you can just leave some of those bare patches for your native bee species. But the more bare soil, the better. Um, Let that leaf litter lay. So a little bit of clutter, a little bit of mess, especially during the winter months, is great for your pollinators. Your bees, they're going to utilize that to keep themselves warm during the winter, protect themselves. So as messy as it might look to us, it looks, again, really, really nice and really, really toasty for a lot of our native bee species. And make sure you're doing regular soil testing. And this is something I didn't talk about when you're prepping. Also test your soil. See if your soil maybe needs a little bit of nitrogen, so fertilizer. Maybe it's a little deficient in some other nutrients. But once your pocket prairie is established, it pretty well is a standalone. It is going to create the nitrogen, it's going to create the phosphorus, it's going to create all those nutrients that it really needs to be self-sustaining. But doing a regular soil test isn't going to hurt. Okay, so my little note on pesticides. So obviously, we don't want to use pesticides in pocket prairies or pollinator gardens, or really our gardens in general, because they are hazardous to our pollinators. But if you need to use a pesticide for some reason, choose a pesticide that is the least harmful to the pollinators. And this is where, again, you do a little bit of research. Having a pesticide that does not have neonicotinoids in it. Make sure, just do a little bit of background, a little bit of research as to which ones are going to least affect things like bees or butterflies. Do a targeted application. So making sure that you are not just doing a general broadcast across your pocket prairie. This is my problem area. This is where I'm going to apply it to. Also, if it's a host plant for a lot of pollinators, you may just have to, I hate to say let it go, but you may have to let it go because your caterpillars are residing on that plant pretty well the entire time till they go into chrysalis. And obviously, biggest thing is don't put pesticides out there when plants are flowering, because that's when those bees, that's when those butterflies or hummingbirds are going to be visiting those flowers the most. So if you do have to apply them, try to do it either before they bloom or after they finish blooming. When it comes to an application method, Sprays are not the best because they can just simply come in contact with those pesticides by obviously sitting on the leaf. It doesn't even have to be consuming anything on the plant. Just sitting on the leaf is going to be enough. So what's recommended is going more of a dry granular application. Some pesticides come in that form. So basically, you're just spreading it right around the base of the tree and doing it that way. Also check the forecast. Make sure it's not going to rain and you're going to apply this, and then it's going to run off and come in contact with all sorts of other things in your yard. So again, pesticides should not be your first line of defense, but if you need to do it, especially if you have a vegetable garden right next door to your pocket prairie, you may need to use pesticides. So just if you do need to use it, keep some of these things in mind. So that is all I have to say about pocket prairies. I want to thank y'all so much for listening to me this afternoon. At this point in time, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that y'all have.
Thank you, Liz. I've been trying to keep track of some of these questions as they've come up
Oh
in the
yes, there's
chat.
like there's a bunch of them, which
Yeah,
is
so I've been
great.
trying to copy and paste a few onto a document so that I can grab them real quick. So one of the first questions asked was about native plant importance and why there are some plant lists. One was specifically listed the Texas A&M Superstar program. Some t still recommends some non-native plants on their list. Um, just do you have anything to add about the importance of planting our natives, but anything to add about the non-natives on some of these lists?
Yeah, and that's one of those where you definitely come across lists that have those non-native plants on it. And a lot of those non-native plants, um, a lot of the time, I'm not going to say that they're not invasive and they can't run away per se. Um, it's just they are a little less likely to do it than some of the other plants that may be out there. Um, that's a really good question. I'd say that that's probably the biggest thing is even though they're non-native, they don't stand as good of a chance of getting away from us because out in the wild they don't do quite as well without our tender loving care of making sure that they get their water when they need it and they get their nutrition whenever they need it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that was very helpful to clarify that a little bit. Next question that I caught was best place to get information on true native plants, which I know that a handful of you guys that are here posted some of this information in the chat, but do you have a couple of good resources that are go-tos for you as far as
I
getting or
mean,
gathering?
Native Plant Society is one that I go to quite a bit. And yeah, that Lady Bird Johnson Wildlife Center, they have quite a few different lists. I think their center is actually based in Austin, I believe. So if y'all are in the Austin area, go over there, check it out, speak with them directly. Your TPWD biologist, if you want to speak with a person, they can probably hook you up with a couple of different lists. But those are probably the two, I'll say, internet ones that I rely on personally.
Okay. Next question that I caught here was, I think you may have touched on it as far as bare patches of soil with fire ants.
Oh,
Suggestions for warding off the fire ants. You mentioned orange oil, and what was the other?
oh, that was a like an organic herbicide mixture.
Okay, okay.
Um, yeah, and that becomes tricky is the fire ants with the bare soil. That is a really great question, and unfortunately, I do not have a really good answer. Fortunately, where I live, we have fire ants, but they're not a huge issue. So that would be something I'd have to look into. I know. Um, uh,
I misspoke. Leaf cutter
oh,
ants.
oh, leaf cutter ants. Oh, okay. Oh, leaf cutter ants. I know even less about leaf cutter ants. Um, ooh, hmm. I would have to ask one of our entomologists about leaf cutter ants and the bare soil. I'm sorry, I do not have a good answer for you on that one, to be
No,
honest.
no problem. It's okay. Um, the next question was about soil solarization damaging tree roots.
Okay, that is a great question. So that should be something it should not. Now, obviously, if you have a younger tree, like a sapling tree that you just planted, I could see it causing some potential issues because those trees don't have that really deep root system. Or potentially, if it is a non-native tree that, again, does not have a deep root system, if it is a well-established thing like a mesquite tree or an oak or a pecan tree, those trees have root systems that are so deep to get down to water sources. It should not be an issue for a lot of our established trees.
Okay. How much bare soil in a pocket prairie is helpful? Some have heard that maintaining some native ground cover to support soil health and moisture is beneficial. I know
Yes.
you mentioned um, mulching, but what about a native ground cover a live ground cover?
Oh, so things like like putting grasses in there. Is
It
that
could be grasses, trailing vines, just a
yeah,
natural ground cover.
yeah, so obviously any too much bare soil obviously is not good. But luckily, within your pocket prairie, once it's established itself over those first couple of years, especially if you throw in those grasses, they're going to extend that root system out. And while there may not be anything there on the surface, there's stuff on the sub level that we're not seeing that should hold your soil in place. Um, Obviously, if you're starting to see issues with that soil erosion, you may want to go in, potentially add some more vegetation there to help hold that soil in place, um, or potentially try, to figure out where that water's coming from to maybe divert it to a different area. Um, it's one of those things where if you think about a prairie on a whole, um, really honestly the pockets of bare soil really aren't going to be all that large on a grand scheme of things. I don't really have like, using, having a patch of ground that's like the size of like a textbook um, every so often it's gonna be great. But and it really comes down to what your aesthetic is. Because I know there's some people that messy is better for them. They don't mind having a messy, I say messy, um, having plants throughout. And there's some people that like more of that manicured type look where plant here looks very nice and aesthetic. Um, so it really comes down to as long as your soil's not washing away, you can have as much bare space sort of as you want between your plants. If I don't know if that answered the question or if I just completely like circled circled around that
No,
question.
I think you answered it just fine. Um, I think that is, oh, there's a one last question about crazy ants, but we've
Oh, crazy
kind of
ants.
stopped. Yeah, those are hard. I have those in my yard, and it's really tough to keep a tab on those little guys
Uh-huh.
too. I think that's it. Can you put your contact information, that last slide back up real quick?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes, I should have just left that up for y'all.
All
But
right,
yeah,
there you go. If
yeah,
anybody
feel
wants to
free
take a
to
quick,
reach out to me. Anything anything wildlife related, please feel free to reach out to me. Give me a call. If you're in the Uvalde area, driving through, please feel free to stop by. Love having a chat with people. But yeah, thank y'all for listening to me for an hour. Hope y'all enjoyed it.
thank you very much.